Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We'll be getting started in just a moment. Before we do, just want to give a couple house rules and announcements at the start of the call. So the Climate Reality Book Club is for both members of the Climate Reality Network and the general public to discuss books with a wide range of themes and genres, all of which are related to climate and the environment. We regularly host these webinars with authors of our selected books, which are moderated by Climate Reality staff and other experts from the field. These webinars provide a unique opportunity to engage in Q&A and commentary and learn more about what you can do to take action on climate. They're open to all, so feel free to invite your friends and families members to join our future book club webinars. If you're a climate reality leader or chapter member, you can also join our book club group on Reality Hub. We use that group to announce each of our book selections and information about upcoming webinars, as well as follow-up educational materials and calls to action from our guests. You can tune into that group to help us determine future book selections, stay up to date with events, and see what folks have been reading. If you do not yet have a Reality Hub account, you can contact support@climatereality.com and we will assist you. Just a reminder that today's webinar is being recorded. The recording will be shared in a follow-up email to attendees and in the book club group on Reality Hub. Throughout the webinar, feel free to submit questions for our speakers using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will do our best to get to every question. Now I want to introduce our staff moderator for this call, Ella Carlson, as well as our special guest, author Nick Fuller Googins. I'll hand it over to you, Ella.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jess. And thank you everyone for being here. My name is Ella Carlson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the presentations associate here at Climate Reality. But I'm so pleased to have the honor to chat with Nick Fuller Googins today about his book. So Nick is the author of the novels The Great Transition, which we'll be talking about today, as well as The Frequency of Living Things, which is coming out this summer. His short fiction and essays have appeared in the Paris Review, Men's Health, the Los Angeles Times, and elsewhere. He lives in Maine and works as an elementary school teacher. He's a member of the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance, as well as the National Education Association, the largest labor union in the United States. So welcome, Nick, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thanks, Ella, for that really sweet intro. And hi, everybody. And huge thanks to the Climate Reality for you all for having me. And always excited to talk about this book with all readers, but especially with when it intersects with climate and I'm sure all the good things that we'll talk about today. So thank you.
Amazing. So we're just going to dive right in with a few questions that we have prepared for you, Nick. And then as Jess mentioned, like audience members, please feel free to submit your own through the Q&A feature at any time. And yeah, we just wanted to start out with a first question to get us into the chat, which is what inspired you to write a climate fiction book as your debut novel?
So, I've been thinking about this a lot because I've just started writing like a new novel. And like before jumping into that, I had 3 ideas and I was really like, I don't know which one, because I'll be with this for years probably. Like it takes a long time to write a book. And I've been having a hard time deciding which new idea to start. But with The Great Transition, it was very different. And it just kind of, it was very much like dictated by the circumstances of what I was doing in life. And so what had happened was like, I've been writing for maybe like 10 years, pretty much every day. Like it's just something I enjoy doing. And I teach, like right now I'm broadcasting live from my 4th grade classroom, which I was telling Ella and the other climate reality folks, I've been very much cooped up in because it's so cold here. So we've had indoor recess. So I've been in this classroom all day, but I'm most excited to be here now. But anyway, I teach, but then I have the summers free to write and do other weird things. And so one summer, I was installing solar panels. And so I had learned how to do this out in Los Angeles, where my wife is from, with this awesome nonprofit called Grid Alternatives, which, like I go on a million tangents, but like this is the kind of thing that I think should be like scaled up nationally. They train whoever wants to come in, a lot of formerly incarcerated folks, poor folks, and then we would learn and install solar panels on like Habitat for Humanity homes and low income homes. It was just awesome. So I learned the basics there, and then we moved to Maine, and I got a job with a small company installing solar panels in gorgeous locations in Maine. And anyway, the reason matters is because it happened to be in the summer of 2018. And this was when, so like the exact time I was doing this, and I really liked to do it. It was fun work to do. Felt like very meaningful. I've always cared about the environment. I'm like under no illusions this is going to save the planet, but it still feels good to do. But then this was the summer where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had won her primary like the spring before. So all summer I'd never heard of her, and then we're hearing about her, and she had well, it wasn't her idea, it was the Green Party's idea, but it was the first time I had heard of the Green New Deal. And as someone who like I don't know. I remember growing up, like getting really depressed about acid rain and rainforest deforestation and the ozone layer and like caring about the environment. And then when I heard about the climate crisis, it was so depressing. I think I kind of like just pushed that out of my mind until this. And then it was so exciting to hear like a whole plan. Like, here's all we need to do. Like, we have enough people and we have enough money, and it could actually happen. And so, because I was installing solar at that time, I started fantasizing, like on my drive home, be like, oh my God, if it really happened, I could join the Solar Corps maybe and like enlist for a few years and imagine being part of a worldwide effort to try to save the planet, like what that would feel like. So obviously that hasn't happened yet in real life, but then like the fiction part of my brain just ran with that. And so that was like the nugget, the seed for the book. And I've since reflected, like here in my fourth grade classroom, when we teach fiction, part of our curriculum to help the kids come up with story ideas, we ask them, like, what are some stories you wish existed in the world? And they're usually heartbreakingly, endearingly autobiographical, like, I wish there was a story about a kid whose parents got back together, or like who was stopped being bullied on the bus. But I realized I was doing the same thing. I was like, oh, I wish there was a story about the world like coming together to like fight the climate crisis, a best worst case scenario, and to like transform society in the process. And then yeah, it just kind of snowballed from there. I ended up like thinking about it for a year, doing 4 or 5 months of solid research, and then started writing it in 2020. But very, very long story. I happened to be installing solar panels right when AOC was like peak celebrity, and everything just kind of like came together after I'd been writing for a while. And that was it.
No,
It
I
took
love
5 years from being like on a rooftop thinking like, oh, this could be a cool idea, to when it came out, which like was relatively, I've learned in publishing, like a relatively short amount of time. But yeah, that's the story.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I was thinking about that a lot when I was reading your book about how it made that future like feel so real and possible, and how that's
Mm,
so like magical, a magical thing about climate fiction in my mind, because we
yeah,
often are so focused on all the bad things that are going to happen in the future if we don't act, and like it's really so useful to have uh, ideas about what it could look like if we do act, if we do get it right. Of course, in your book, we don't get everything right, but that was really, yeah, something I was thinking about a lot as well.
totally, yeah. And just to add on to what you're saying now, that a lot of the plot became like, well, like, what structurally would need to happen. But I thought a lot about my experiences, both like fighting for like really small environmental wins, but also just being part of a group or a movement. And I'm sure a lot of people on this can relate to like a lot of the work people are doing feels impossible, and sometimes we can despair, but like to be doing it with other people is also really joy. It can be really joyous, even when you're like up against a really, really hard big enemy or something really, really difficult. And so for like the characters, I think a lot of even like, I don't know, I thought back to like my high school days. I used to play sports and we were the worst team. We'd always lose just horribly in every sport. But it was really fun, like just to be a part of a team, even when you're losing, you're struggling against something really difficult. So anyway, that sense, I tried to like weave that into the characters a lot, but I think we've all kind of experienced it in different ways in life, hopefully a little bit.
Totally, yeah. That makes me want to go to this next question. I'm gonna mix up our planned order a little bit because
Yeah, let's
that
do it.
makes me think about hope. Because this book felt very distinct from some other climate fiction books that I've read. Because, like I just said, the apocalypse kind of did happen, right? They didn't act fast enough, but in many ways, that just transition that we talk about all the time also did happen. And you have these really powerful like stories about like the climate core, the forest core, and everything. And so in many ways that feels really powerfully hopeful to me. But it's also clear that like your characters have very differing ideas and outlooks on hope. And so I was just wanting to ask you, like personally, how do you define hope in the face of the climate crisis?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's such a good question. I think like this book made me think a lot about like hope versus optimism. And I think like some of the main characters really ended up kind of like personifying that. And like so Larch especially, who fought hard during the transition and now just like wants to enjoy life. And he's like, I see signs things are going, it might not be great, but like I don't know, it'll be okay. Things will turn out okay. And I think this is like kind of like epitomizes like an American optimism. I know it's like hard to generalize 350 or so million people, but a feeling overall that like, yeah, things will be okay. Versus hope, I feel like involves a little action, like some little bit of action, whether it's like actually being part of something or at least like advocating for something, doing some support work on the side. And I think like one of the things that was most exciting to me about this book was that after it came out, I ended up having conversations with other hopeful climate writers and other people involved in like utopia and hope and just like projects of hope. And it was so fascinating for me and very I feel like filled up like my reservoir of like long-term hope, especially like right now where it feels like things are not great. It was so interesting to talk with people and historians about just human history and like how adaptive we are as a species and creative and resilient, and how at every dark time of human history, whether it's like we could go like feudalism, slavery, monarchy, um, during like the darkest days of like Eastern European communism, there's always people, always who are like, there's no hope. This is just the way things are. You're foolish and naive and unrealistic and childish if you think anything could change. Like, get your head out of the clouds, be realistic. And every time things change, and things can change so fast. And it's been so interesting learning about like in Eastern Europe, there's like one historian had found letters from people who had killed themselves, and they'd written in their letters like, "I'm never going to see Paris. I'm never going to be free. Communism's going to be here forever." And then like a week later, the Berlin Wall fell, and we just like history changes so fast. And I think just to keep that in mind, like there's just no way we can be stuck right now. Like there's no way. It's something's going to shift. But I think like to go back to your question, the hopeful part is to be like part of that shift. So supporting whatever happens or whatever opening there is and running for it. Like looking back, just I don't know, we don't have to get too much. I don't know, we can go wherever we want, but I thought a lot about politically. I feel like we had a huge opening for some big change with the both of Bernie Sanders' candidacies, and people were really nervous about that. And I feel like we really missed an opportunity just to shake things up. But so like my hope, I guess, is like the next time something comes along like that, like I don't know, maybe AOC will run for president or something, to really be part of pushing that as far as we can, knowing that like, you know, everyone's like, oh, the two-party system, this is just the way America is. It's the way things always will be. But like all of history shows that it's just total nonsense. Like things always change, and they can. Um, I just try to keep a little hope to be like, I'm gonna keep that ember burning. We're part of a super creative, adaptive species. I'm gonna keep an eye out for like how I can be part of that change, and then just like run with it whenever it comes next.
Yeah, totally. Some of what you're saying as well is making me think of this idea that our founder and chairman Al Gore references sometimes, which is that like it's been found that the antidote to climate dread and anxiety is climate action, and how that is like tied together with hope for sure.
Yeah, and I thought about that too a lot with the characters, like Christina and Larch enlist in the transition. Like neither of them are environmentalists. They have not, like that's not why they enlisted, but they find like so much hope and meaning being part of a big movement. And I think like thinking about like the times in my life when I felt like most alive and joy and this feeling of kind of like enraptured awe, it's always with other people, whether it's like a protest or a picket line, but also just like group singing or dancing or being part of a team. And it made me think too that like a big collective project like the Great Transition or Green New Deal would be like, it would be amazing because it would both accomplish all like the infrastructure things we need to get done, but it would give such a sense of collective purpose to us, like as our nation. And I feel like without that sense of purpose, we see, you know, like overdoses and school shootings and depression and loneliness. And like we're just like a social species. We have to be connected to other people. And without being part of a big collective project that's constructive, like people will gravitate towards the only big collective project which is in town right now, which is like right-wing nationalism, and it sucks, but there's nothing else. I don't know. There's like no competing collective vision out there. And so I just loved for the fiction part of me to imagine like what that would look like and how just regular everyday people would just get swept up in it. I really do believe and be like, I don't know. I just think as people were like naturally good and want to do the right thing and want to be constructive and helpful and work towards a future, you know, for our kids and grandkids. And I don't know. So anyway, you can tell I got excited about it in the book. And it still lives within me.
Totally. Yeah. I love that perspective. I want to switch gears a little bit to talk a little bit more about like your writing process. I had another question, which was how your world building and plot development shifted throughout your writing process from your initial, spark, and how did that process and bringing your characters to life and the world to life also in turn shift your feelings and perspective about the climate crisis in particular, if they did.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great question. And it was like, yeah, when I thought about like the original concept, I was in Maine, like in my late 30s. So I'm like kind of imagining Larch, like a character like me, about my age. And so that was like the initial spark. But right, I had to be like, all right, I'm going to set this, I don't know, like 60, 70, 80 years in the future, maybe just and I do have like the publisher ended up, when I was getting copy edited, like it was my first book. It was all brand new to me. And one of the things they wanted to make sure all the dates lined up. So I had to make a timeline. But I kept it like I didn't want any years to be attached to the story, so it's a secret timeline. But it's like, you know, like decades, many decades in the future, what would the world look like? So I was doing just tons of research about like the science and New York's topography, like what would be underwater, what would still be above water. But then the real break came for me when I was at my brother's place and he had gone to school for urban planning. And I was just, you know, as we will do maybe with our family members as we're hanging out, like I'm just kind of like snooping, just casually like rifling through his like, you know, sitting at his desk talking, I'm looking through his mail. And there was a newsletter from his urban planning school. And on the back of the newsletter was an advertisement for a book that a bunch of urban planners had put together called Utopia, Dystopia 2100. And it was like, you can imagine kind of these like futuristic schematics that architects will make, like renderings. And it was a bunch of architects and urban planners had gotten together to be like, what's the best case scenario of what the world might look like in 2100, which was like, I was months into this thinking about it, but didn't know really what. And it was just amazing how like, if I'm working on a writing project for long enough, it just feels like the universe will just send me stuff like this. And so they had looked at this idea of like Nuuk in Greenland being up on the cliffs, well above sea level rise, and to look at like closer to the poles, and this idea of what they called like extraction cities. And so a lot of it, I got so much inspiration from them. And just in general, like a lot of the world is just technology that either already exists or is in the stages of development, which was just, by the way, another hopeful piece for me is because like, I don't know, I think about like if there was an asteroid headed towards us and we didn't have the technology to defeat to destroy it. Like that's scary in a different way. But we have all the technology we need to defeat the climate crisis and build a better world in its place. It's all there already, and so which is both frustrating but also pretty hopeful. And so all the technology was researched. Like in the book, I talk about like gravity storage warehouses, which is a solution for solar at night and during cloudy days. And this exists already in China, like they're already up and running, and it seems like the future to us, but it's happening, it's out there. So anyway, that influenced it a lot. And I think like to answer your question, it did make me like that part made me hopeful to be like, oh, there is all this technology out here. We don't have to invent like fancy carbon capture machines. Trees are amazing carbon capture machines. Um, and then like what would the world look like more like federated, like uh almost like city states coordinating with one another. And I just, I'm not, like you can see, I'm a fourth grade teacher. I'm not a futurist scientist. So I didn't want to get too into the weeds about like quantum computing and what technology might look like at that point. But it did make me reflect of like the sheer amount of computing we have now as far as like organizing resources and materials. If it was put to a different task than like minting cryptocurrency or like coming up with really funny memes, like what could that accomplish? And then just as a last thing that gave me a lot of like hope and inspiration, weirdly, was research into the past. And so I had done a lot of research into the New Deal, which the Green New Deal obviously is inspired after. And one of the things I found, and I'll just share this one real briefly, is that when FDR signed an executive order for the Civilian Conservation Corps, within days, they had their first recruits. Within 2 weeks, they had their first camp built in George Washington National Forest. And within 3 months, they had hundreds of thousands of people working in thousands of camps across the country. And I was like, oh my God, if we can do this almost 100 years ago, no GPS, no highways, no computers, no internet, like surely we could do it. Like an amazing logistical feat could be accomplished now. And so anyway, that just helped me think about like, transporting like batteries and materials around the world, which seems futuristic, but like I think we could do it. So yeah, tons of research went into it, and a lot of it, even though like side by side, the research on like sea level rise and heat and so much was so scary, but also researching all the technology at the same time um, was pretty helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you bring up the point that we have all of the technology already that we need, because that's also something that Mr. Gore talks about a lot, and that I don't think a lot of people necessarily realize, that we have everything we need to reach net zero by 2050. And there's like plans that the International Energy Agency has laid out showing exactly how we could get there. So yeah, I agree that that's a hopeful thing for sure, and something that I think more people
Yeah.
should know about. Yeah. Um, the next question that I wanted to ask you is about one of more specific component of your novel, which is the inclusion of one of the main characters, Emmy's school project, and her teacher's feedback on it. Since I know you're an elementary school teacher, I wanted to ask you about that and see how I know in the discussion at the end of the book, you mentioned that Emmy was inspired by all the kids you've worked with over the years. And I'm wondering how your experiences talking with kids about climate change in particular maybe inspired Emmy's perspective in those pieces of the book.
Yeah, so like right now, like the kids I teach are 9 and 10 years old. And so I teach them about, I like it would feel weird to not talk about climate change at all, even though it's not part of our official curriculum, because it's like probably going to be the defining feature of their lives. But I'm really careful to always like balance what's happening and the science of it with some kind of hope, because I don't, I don't want them to be terrified. So like I love to teach them about Greta, because they love this idea that someone their age could skip school and like make a statement, like they're obsessed with her. I'll show them like, young Greta. I know she's older now. Um, the conversations I have with them right now are pretty, like superficial, and I try to keep it a little bit lighter. But I'd say like the main thing that went into Emmy's character is this idea that I feel like when I taught, and like also the children of some friends of mine who are a little bit older, this idea that like if we grow up in like a safe, comfortable household, we just grow up with the assumption that like the adults love us and are taking care of us, like our family, our teachers, the people in our community, our neighbors. I know it's not true for everybody, but in an ideal situation. But then this thing happens where like for a lot of kids, it's been around school shootings and just gun safety, and to be like this sudden break of like what the hell, like the adults clearly do not have a handle on this. And to the point where you see this too with the climate movement, where there'll be older people who are like, yay, like the youth are leading the way, like let the young people lead the way. But I'm like, I don't know, this just seems like way unfair to put on their shoulders. And I'm part of a teachers union. We already have an organization in place. Like we should be doing this, not children. But that like anxiety, that first awareness of like, oh my God, the adults don't know what they're doing. So I think about that for gun safety, and then for the climate crisis too. That when it's like, holy shit, this is a really big problem. The adults are not fixing this at all. So like that kind of like generalized anxiety of like anything could happen, society is not as safe as it is. Like that was a lot of the anxiety that went into Emmy's character. And I'd also worked with like I used to work actually in the Pacific Palisades in Los Angeles. My old school's it's gone. It's just gone. It burned down. And but a lot of the kids out there are very wealthy, very, very well off. And like those neighborhoods like a month ago, not anymore, but you'd be like, oh, this is a utopian community. Like they have everything they want. And yet some kids I would work with and privately tutor were like just crippled by anxiety, whether it was like social media related or I don't know, but just this idea like no matter our circumstances in life, especially in adolescence, but at any time, like for reasons we don't know, like people can just be so, so anxious. So working with a lot of kids in that situation really went into Emmy's character as well. And then it was just fun to like, I used to teach older kids and intro writing courses and doing like comments on Google Docs that I knew would never be read. And so it was fun to just like harness that part of Mrs. Elmandi, the teacher, to relive some of that experience again.
Totally. I like that. Yeah, one of the things you were saying earlier about, saying the youth are going to save the day and look at all these great youth, leading the way, which is so important to uplift youth as well. But I believe we have a blog that was written a little while ago on the Climate Reality blog about the concept of youth washing and also like
Huh.
and like sort of inspired by the term greenwashing, which made me think of that as well. The balance of not sort of tokenizing youth as well,
Yeah.
putting it all on their shoulders, and yeah,
Yeah, I never heard that term, but totally. And it's like, right, romanticizing the youth and then also gives people a pass who actually have a position of like somewhat security and power, whatever little we have. And I had just over the weekend, our like local public radio station was playing a lot of Martin Luther King speeches. And one I'd never heard, I think it was set in Birmingham, and he's talking about like young people who were being arrested. And he was like, they're gonna be okay, like they're doing their job, but this has just made me think about it. But it wasn't like the adult community was stepping back, letting them do it. Like they were simultaneously in the same boat together, and like that is a different situation and can be really inspiring. But that is not right. That's not what's happening, which we see a lot of now, unfortunately.
Right, totally. Also, as an aside, I love that she's called Mama Greta in the future in your book.
I think, yeah, right. She could be so famous. I mean, a
Yeah,
legend, a legend.
totally. Yeah, I have a couple more questions for you, but I see there's some coming in the Q&A too, so hopefully we'll get to plenty of those.
Okay.
But we have a little bit more time. And so this next one is part of the, again, great book club discussion guide that you have at the back of the book. And I wanted to turn it back on you to get your perspective as the author. So it's another one of the main characters, Larch, who we talked about. He's vocal about his daughter Emmy enjoying her youth and participating in celebrations like Day Zero. And some questions that this brings up is, are celebrations essential to society? Can joy be defined as another form of resistance in itself? And then also for you personally, in what ways do you practice active joy in your daily life?
Mm. You know, I think about I have this memory, like I don't have the best I don't have a very good memory. But I have this memory of being in Boston, and there was SEIU, the Service Employees Union. I don't know if they still have this campaign. It was Justice for Janitors. And I remember just kind of hearing like, oh, there's like a picket line and a demonstration downtown and joining it with some friends. But I remember being there at the moment where this one woman was going to work, and she was like, you know, going to some office building or something. So she's probably going to clean the building, and there's the picket line, and it was like very tense. And they're like, you know, don't cross the picket line. Like I don't know, I don't know what was said. She's like, probably like, I got to make some money, I got to feed my family, whatever. She passed the picket line, went to the door, and then turned around, came back, and someone gave her a Justice for Janitor shirt. She put it on, and I'm getting goosebumps right now. This was like, you know, 15 years ago or so. I don't know, maybe even longer. And anyway, like that, the joy of like that place, just hundreds of people saw that and exploding in joy. And so I think there can be like so much joy in protest and movement too, and so inspiring. I was like in LA during the not the last teacher strike, but the one before. And same thing, like walking that picket line, students showing up, community showing up, taco cart, someone had bought like tacos for everybody and music. And so I think like ideally there can be a lot of joy, like joyous warriors. And those are some really, really inspirational moments. But I think like you just, I don't know, personally, I've gotten burnt out before in activism in different parts of my life. And I've seen it not be helpful, not a good example for other people or my friends or family. And so it's such a hard balance. It's so hard because these are things I think about this a lot for school violence too, like worrying about in my school shootings, being like, I should be working on this all the time. And also like I just have to enjoy life to not go insane, but also like, what does that say when we're not doing this all the time? These voices are in my head, and it became basically like Christina and Larch in the book. It's like they can try to like battle it out a little bit. Um, but I don't know. I hope I'll be lucky to live a long life and go through different phases. And again, like I don't know, I try to tell myself, even if I'm not like on the front of something right now, that if there's some crack and something opens up, that I will like put everything I can into pushing that forward. And at the very least, not throwing doubt on it, not being like, well, I don't know, we're moving too fast. This could get, you know, like I just want to be ready to support that. So like right now with my local teachers union, I'm just trying to work on like building capacity and getting us to be more active union so that I don't know if something comes up, like we're ready and we're mobilized. So it's hard. It can be really like hard and frustrating and feel really disappointing to take like such a back long view approach. But I don't have all any answers or many answers, and so I'm trying to figure it out too. And this book was definitely a part of like trying to get some of those ideas out there.
Yeah, I can really relate to that tension as well that I totally saw embodied between Christina and Larch. And I like what you're saying about the importance of like melding the two. You know, how you can have joy in protest and you can have moments of celebration and joy like be part of the work and the organizing, which I think is, yeah, so essential not to think of them as like mutually exclusive. Yeah. Um, let's see. I think I just have one final question for now about your book specifically,
Okay.
which is just like to zoom out and ask what are the like top key messages that you hope readers will take away from your book?
Yeah, I think the big message that like that I kind of I don't know. I was taught in writing school, like the George Saunders, an amazing writer, amazing short story writer. I'd heard him say like a great way to write a really shitty book is to like choose a theme and write to that theme. So I was like, got that message loud and clear. So like built, come up with some characters, an idea, just like see where things go. But what's been really interesting is since then, since the book came out, having talks like this, I wrote a lot of op-eds, like a lot of like political pieces about it, and it's just made me, I feel like, reflect especially on the fact that so, like, again, like that we are such an adaptable, creative species. We've gotten out of times that are so bleak and dark that people thought it could never happen. And one thing that I really it kind of like excited me and gave me hope is this there's so many like little utopian pockets that exist all around us that we take for granted because it's like baked into our society. And so one of them is like I teach in this massive public school. There's 620 kids, grades 3, 4, and 5, and they're fed breakfast and lunch, and they're social workers. And if there's kids who need school supplies, like we have backpacks and warm clothes for them. And like the list goes on and on. And sometimes I'd leave school and be like, all right, this place isn't perfect, but like pretty amazing that this exists. And then I learned that free and public education was on in 1848 was like a plank of the Communist Manifesto. Like it was considered the most radical idea, and people thought it was completely impractical. Like strangers are never going to pay for other people's kids to be educated. So I think about things like public education, our local library is incredible. Like the amount of services it provides beyond books is astounding. There's even things like when I went to my wife's from California, and out there they have the Coastal Commission that is trying to protect every inch of the coastline to keep it open to the public versus here in Maine when we have private beaches. So there's just all these little pockets that exist that people fought for. And every single one of those things came from some people just getting around thinking, being like, huh, like, wouldn't it be cool? Or like, let's hope, imagine if things were this way and things were different. And it always like had to just start with a thought and a group of people getting together and then like starting to make moves towards that thing happening. And it's worked so many times in the past. And so I just have to think like there's got to be all these utopias waiting, like coming down the pipeline that we don't even know about. And it just gives me so much hope to be a part of something even small. And so even though the book's fiction, it's set in the future, I hope that can be, some small takeaway that this isn't like complete fantasy. It's kind of like the history of our species. It's just what we do over and over and over again. And hopefully we'll continue to.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate like, yeah, recognizing the historical perspective and that like not taking for granted all of the steps that have taken us to where we are today. So yeah, I love that. Okay, one last sort of bonus question before we get to some audience questions, because as book lovers, I know we're always looking for new recommendations. So wanted to ask you, what are some other books that have changed how you see the world and or how you think about climate change?
Yeah, well, two kind of like the two OG ones that really influenced this are Ursula K. Le Guin, she's since passed amazing science fiction writer, so ahead of her time, from like race to gender. And then one book in particular, The Dispossessed, was really eye-opening for me, that just helped me think about like how society's structured and how it could be different. And it's hard science fiction set in a totally fictional solar system, but it's like I love this about science fiction. It just makes me be like, huh, like I hadn't thought about what I thought was just the way things are, do not need to be that way. So Ursula K. Le Guin, The Dispossessed, and then Octavia Butler's was a really big influence on me too. Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talent, this duology, this very bleak, but also has like this kernel of hope and utopia in it. So those two were really impactful, kind of like long term. And then one author who I connected with, who's writing current climate fiction, who is so awesome, her name is Allegra Hyde. And she has two fantastic books. Eleutheria is a hopeful climate novel. And then she also has a short story collection, The Last Catastrophe, that a lot of it is climate fiction based and has that same kind of like, yeah, like just that little like seed of hope kind of threaded throughout. And then I love Kim Stanley Robinson's books are so good. I love him too, as far as like hopeful, futuristic science fiction, and learned that he had studied under Ursula Le Guin. So when I learned that, I was like, oh, that makes sense. Because it's kind of like, yeah, a hopeful outlook too. So those are the Cli-Fi books, past and present, that really excite me.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Taking mental notes and physical notes. And I see that a bunch of people also asked about books and authors that have inspired you. So that's perfect. Thanks for answering that one. Yeah, so we've had a bunch of good. Oh yeah,
Wait,
go for it.
sorry, I have to say one more thing, because with the Climate Reality Project founded by Al Gore, sorry, there's one more book. It's called The Free People's Village, and by Sim Kern. And what it imagines is a future where Al Gore won the 2000 election, and there was a war declared on the climate on climate change, but it's kind of like been a little bit co-opted, and it takes place in Houston, which I also really enjoy. Just like not, I don't know, not the most common, not a super common setting, and kind of there's a lot of like echoes of Occupy in it. So I just had to put that out there. The Free People's Village, really good too. Sorry, I
Cool.
didn't.
No, perfect. Yeah, so we've got some great questions. The first one from John says, I taught your novel last year in an Emory University course on recent eco-fiction, and the students read it very enthusiastically, and several of them wondered whether it would or is also having a crossover life in the YA world.
Thank you, John, for teaching it. That's so cool to hear. Um, I had like the publisher before the book came out had talked a little bit about it, but I had never seen it on any like YA lists or shelves in any bookstores. And of like all the comments I've gotten like just a few comments from much younger, like teenage readers. And maybe this is just something that, I don't know, maybe like younger readers don't reach out to authors as much. But I had not intended that at all. It had never crossed my mind. But I mean, I could get in. This is such a long tangent that I won't get into. But basically, like the book had been written from Larsh's perspective almost completely. And then some editors who were so generous and read it were like, we love Emmy. Like, we really think you should rewrite the book, giving Emmy equal screen time. And that's what happened. I thought about it, like I've heard this, I don't know if this is true, the Harrison Ford in Star Wars, or before Star Wars, was like an extra or something, or a carpenter on the set. I don't know what the legend is. And then they were like, this guy, like he needs to be on the big screen. And I felt like that kind of happened with Emmy. And I was really glad about it. And so I'd never intended it for a YA audience, but like I would love that. And I just think like that means it's accessible, and I just want to read and write things that are most like the most more people that can enjoy, the better. So I'd be thrilled if that did happen.
That's so cool. Yeah, I'm glad that Emmy's perspective got in there as well. It was really cool to have the balance. So our next question is more about your writing process. So what's your drafting process and routines that you use to help you unblock writing in lengthy projects like books?
Yeah, so I like this is a great question for me right now, starting a brand new book. And I just can't, if I like pull back and try to envision the whole project, it's very overwhelming. I mean, I don't know, this is probably like a metaphor for life or something. So I usually will write before school, like 45 minutes to maybe an hour. And as long as like I'll just like have that time and just that time alone, and I'm just gonna read over what I've written the day before and then keep going. And maybe there'll be another paragraph or two paragraphs. And that's how I end up making a draft. Sometimes I think about it like combing, like yeah, combing hair or like combing the knots out of things. Cause as the longer it gets, I'll still go back to the beginning and like reread it and then add a little more and a little more. And then one thing at this point now, I've been writing like um, for like 15 years, pretty much regularly. And so one thing that's been nice is like just knowing once I get a draft done, and I'd heard this a million times, but it was different than when I could experience it myself, to put it aside, come back to it weeks, months later, and just be, you know, pretty ruthless, and being able to revise and cutting things and moving things around. I heard a great metaphor that was like when we write a first draft of something, it's like we've built a house, and like here are the rooms, and it can become so easy in my mind to solidify like this is the house, these are where the rooms go, and it can become so hard to knock down a wall. But then when it happens and you're like, oh, this chapter, don't need it, it can be really relieving. So I think just I'm still practicing that process. But that's basically how I operate. And then over the summer, because I'm a teacher, I get a lot more time to focus for sure. But otherwise, it's like just a little bit every day really does add up.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it sounds like we have some writers in our audience as well, too. So that's helpful. Um, we have another question here about what was the most challenging part of writing this novel, and conversely, what was the most pleasurable part of writing this novel?
The Yeah, the most challenging part was definitely that revision note I got. There was like, I mean, because I'd probably written 150 pages, 200 pages, and then it was like, yeah, like this should be have, I mean, you should have equal time. And that I think I needed like 24 hours to think like, oh my God, this is month, maybe we're talking like 5, 6, 7 months just to get back to this number of pages. So that was probably the hardest. But I will say, like, as soon as I started it, it was it was really like, oh, this was a fantastic piece of advice. It feels good energy. Like, thank God. I was just talking about this with another writer, like editors, if writers don't put in the acknowledgments, their editors and the agents, also the agent who represents me will reads my reads and gives feedback. They are so helpful, and it seems so unfair that, you know, like a movie, the credits roll, you're gonna know who directed it and edited it, and editors don't get a lot of credit. But like that was such key advice I got. So that was very hard, but also felt good. And then I'd say like probably one of the most joyous parts, probably one of the most joyous parts for me is like I guess like really getting to envision these like pivotal moments in history that I wish happened. So like in the book where when people essentially it's like a general strike, like to know like it's possible, like this is who has the power, it's just workers and regular people, and to be like, oh, I get to just really imagine what this would look like and what it would feel like to be part of it. And so that was pretty that could be kind of thrilling too, and to research that kind of stuff, like what it's been like to be in a general strike, and just that feeling of like enrapturement to be like I'm part of a community and a group of people, and we're fighting together to try to make the world a better place.
That's so cool. Yeah, that totally came through. Um, One more question is, are there programs or trainings for teachers like yourself to have better tools to teach children that you might recommend?
I wonder if this is like climate specific tools.
It doesn't specify climate, but
Hmm.
maybe if you have climate specific ones, this would be a great audience for
Yeah,
that.
like I think there's so many more of these popping up, and our district has been pretty great at like at supporting this for paid professional development. So here in Maine, there's a place called the Ecology School, where a lot of us, like the teacher next door to me, the third grade teacher, has been she went through this program, and she is awesome. She goes out to morning meeting every morning meeting twice a week outside, no matter what. And I just love it. And so it gives me like a little more permission to try to get outside with my class more, just to teach like a love for the outdoors and a love for like trees and just nature. And kids are naturally like, we all remember like nature's amazing and it doesn't take a lot at all to make kids super excited about nature and asking a million questions. And so maybe part of it is just like to keep that awe going. And thinking like like long-term appreciation for the outdoors and wilderness, what that could do for kind of like the climate environmental movement. Um, but so I guess that would be like climate specific. If this is teaching, I mean, teaching specific, I don't know. I keep hearing there's like desperate need for teachers everywhere right now. And I know like our school is desperate for like substitutes and ed techs, and that's how I got into teaching. It was the best education I got because I could see like so many different classes and how different teachers worked. And so I guess if anyone who's interested in that, that would be like, that is the best way to kind of dip your toes into the water.
Sweet. Cool. Um, okay, yes, it sounds like the question was climate specific, so perfect that you covered that.
Yeah, I think there's got to be like things like the ecology school. I hope all around. I do feel like there's like a movement to bring more like environmental and climate education into the classroom.
Totally. Cool. We have time for one more audience question. It sounds like folks are hungry for more great transition content. So someone is wondering if there are any plans for a movie or video game or TV show version of the book.
This was so okay. So this was both such a funny and exciting part of this process for me because again, this was new for me completely. Like I went to an amazing writing school in Rutgers, uh, amazing program, but like none of it was oriented for publication, which I'm glad. They were just like, this is how the craft of writing. So everything's been brand new to me, including when the agent who represents me was like, okay, now we need to get a TV and you need a TV and film agent to represent you. And so there's an agent who represents me for that. And we've had maybe 4 discussions with Hollywood production companies. And luckily, the literary agent warned me like right before. She's like, "Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you. Like they're like name drop like crazy, and they just have this energy where they're like, you think you're like, oh my god, it's gonna happen, and then nothing happens. And I think that seems to be like how Hollywood works a little bit. But there were some really fun conversations, including I can't remember the name of the production company. They wanted to do a television show, and they had even brainstormed different episodes, which was so fun to hear about. So they were like one whole episode they could imagine as like Christina's story from like her childhood through to the beginning of the transition. And then I loved this idea. They had an idea for another episode that would be this like meta episode. It would be an episode of Core Power, kind of the reality show that Larch and his crew are featured in. And so it'd just be that would be the episode, one episode of that show, which I loved that idea. So unfortunately, though, I haven't heard anything for a while. I don't know, but I also guess sometimes these things take like just years and years and years um, to come about, but nothing on the back burner, unfortunately.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I will be keeping my ears out in case anything does happen in the future. That sounds really cool. I think we've made it through all of our questions. So we can go ahead and wrap up, but just once again, thank you so much to everyone who attended and for asking your questions. And thank you, Nick, for being here. I know I told you this before, but I picked up your book and I just could not put it down until I finished it. So
Uh,
grateful to be able to chat with you about it today. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ella. Thanks everyone for reading and tuning in. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks again, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Nick, for being our featured speaker this afternoon. Just wanted to share a few closing statements with you all. If you're inspired by what you've heard today and you want to learn how you can take bold climate action, then we invite you to join our global network of 3.5 million, working to build a just and sustainable true net zero future. You can visit the climaterealityproject.org to read more about our campaigns, programs, and initiatives. If you're already part of our network, then we encourage you to visit Reality Hub to explore our latest action alerts and opportunities for learning. Don't forget to stop by the book club group while you're there. If you don't yet have a Reality Hub account, you can contact support@climatereality.com and we will assist you. Otherwise, I think that's all from us, and we'll see you at our next book club webinar. Take care, everyone.